thermoregulation and heat stress in sheep and goats. Presently, at the time, the most of you have must felt the scorching heat of the summer, right? And the change in the climate is also very much evident right now. And the climate change has become a reality for today's situation. And in this scenario, the sustaining the livestock production has become a challenging task for the veterinarians, for the livestock producers, or for all the persons who are involved with the livestock sector. And in this condition, when the rearing the animals or rearing any kind of livestock is challenging, goat and sheep both have become a very ideal climate animal model because they have certain importance, they have certain characteristics which other livestock species don't have. For example, they are better, they have the better thermotolerance, they are also drought tolerance, they have the ability to survive on the limited pasture, and they also has the disease resistance capacity. And in the context of indirect effect of changing climate pertaining to the feed and fodder availability, as you all know that if there is change in the climatic condition, definitely it will affect the feed and fodder availability also. And in that condition also, rearing goat is considered more economical than rearing the large animals. Here I am there is a diagram of the worldwide distribution of the goat population. And you can see here with this color gradient, then mostly in the Asian countries, like in the Indian subcontinent, and also many of the African countries, it has a high population of the goat. So, and in terms of number and the socio-economic importance, the sheep and goat are among the most critical livestock species. And now I am going to show, this is another representation of the distribution of sheep globally. And here also you can see that in the Indian subcontinent again, and in the African subcontinent also, there is a huge population of the goat is available. If we look into the history of the domestication of these animal species, we can see that the goat were the first ruminant to be domesticated around 11,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent. This Fertile Crescent is nothing but an area in the Middle East where the first domestication of this goat was started. And following that, these animals, they were dispersed across the globe, adapting themselves to the diverse biophysical and production environment. And although these goats, they are considered well adapted to the tropical climate, their adaptive response significantly hampered their production. This is very much important that I told you already that the domestication started at a particular place, and after that it spreaded globally. In different climatic conditions, you can see if you look into the different breeds of the goat in the global conditions, the goats, they are not only in the tropical climate but also in different other climatic zone also. The different breeds have adapted themselves for those particular climatic situations, and they have developed certain adaptive responses to fight with this harsh environment. But what have what have been the effect of this adaptation? The adaptive responses is hampering the production, and as a result, the like elevated ambient temperature, if there is the temperature is high and the goat is adapting for the high temperature, it will affect the growth, it will affect the milk production, it will affect the meat production, and also the immune responses in the goat. So the adaptation is really good. If the goat it is adapting, or the sheep it is adapting with the local environment, definitely the adapting capability is more in case of sheep and goat compared to the large ruminants, as I told you. But with that increase in adoption, it is affecting the production also. So what are the different changes, adaptation responses, or the different physiological responses that we can see in this species? Like in case of high temperature, activate their physiological adaptability. Which what are the different types of physiological adaptability? Like in there will be change in the behavior, in the physiological response, blood biochemical and endocrinological response to regulate their body temperature and to maintain the homeothermy. As you already know that our body, whatever may be the situation, physiologically it always try to maintain the homeostasis or a balance with the environment. Whatever may be the environmental situation, the environment may be, in the environment it may be high temperature, in the environment it may be lower temperature, there may be several other environmental variations may be there. but our body or the body of the animal, it always try to maintain a homeostasis. It always try to maintain a constant internal temperature, and which is called the homeothermy, in constant temperature inside the animal body. And the adaptive processes are energy demanding. So whenever the animal is trying to adapt with the environment, it requires or it demands some energy, and they, as a result, they channelize their energy from the productive pathway to the adaptive pathway, and that. And the such behavior of reducing production to support the life sustaining activities is a typical characteristics of the adapted goat breeds. If we see, look into the animals, different animal species, whether it is sheep, whether it is goat, or whatever may be the, in case of large animals also, whenever they are trying to cope up with the natural barriers or the natural hazards, definitely their production and reproduction, they are always hampered, they are always compromised. If the animal is in heat stress, definitely its production will decrease. If the animal is in again cold stress, its production will be decreased. And not only production, reproduction, growth, and different type of all the parameters of the physiological parameters, they are affected by these stresses. So heat stress is one of the major stress of the animal, which can result into the reduction of the feed intake, reduction in the digestibility, and the utilization efficiency. Though the goats have the capacity for adaptation to convert the poor quality feed to the product, still in the heat stress prolonged for a longer duration, it can affect their growth performances. For example, it has already been noted that 11%, 8%, or 6% growth was observed. A reduction in this 11, 8, or 6% of growth was observed in Usmanabadi, Malabari, and the Salim Black breed, respectively, in the heat stress condition. So as I told you, if there is heat stress condition, there will be decrease in the feed intake, there will be the problem in the digestibility, there will be the problem in utilization efficiency, and all this will result into a decreased growth rate in these animals. Now looking into this, that what is the different endocrinological changes occurs in the this animal species, I will again discuss this in later, but right now the reduction in the heat stress associated growth is mostly due to the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis in response to the heat stress. This hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, it is also called in short the HPA axis. You already know that different hormones are secreted from the different endocrine glands of our body and also in the body of the animals also. So one of the most important gland that is present in our body is pituitary gland, present in our brain. And that pituitary gland, we call that master gland. And above pituitary, that is another gland which controls the secretion of the pituitary gland, is hypothalamus, which we call the master of the master gland, or which is the like most superior gland. So from hypothalamus, one hormone is secreted, that is the corticotropin releasing hormone, right? CRH, or corticotropin releasing hormone. This corticotropin releasing hormone secreted from the hypothalamus, it acts on the pituitary, right? And from the pituitary, this corticotropin releasing hormone, it stimulates the secretion of another hormone from the pituitary, that is ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, right? Now this adrenocorticotropic hormone, from the name itself, it is very much clear that this hormone acts on the adrenal cortex. There is another gland in our body, that is the adrenal gland, and this adrenal gland has two layers. First one is the cortex, and then there is the medulla layer. In the cortex layer, there is the different again sublayers are there, and from the adrenal cortex, when this adrenocorticotropic hormone acts on the adrenal gland secretes cortisol. Along with cortisol, several other hormones are also secreted, but right now we are focusing mostly on the cortisol. And this cortisol, when it is secreted from the adrenal gland, it affects the different parameters of the growth. For example, this cortisol, it affects the growth hormone, it affects the growth of the animal, it can affect the meat production, it can affect the carcass characteristics, and it can also affect the milk production. So you also know probably that this hormone cortisol is also called stress hormone. Whether it may be heat stress, cold stress, or any type of stress, our body secretes this cortisol hormone, and as a secretion of this cortisol hormone, the production parameters you can see here. For example, as we are mainly focusing on the growth, I am telling here that all the growth parameters in case of sheep and goat, they are hampered. So it is also always, it should be our target or motto to reduce the level of this cortisol hormone. And how it can be reduced? To reduce the stress on the animals. So as much as possible, if we can reduce the stress on the animal, there will be reduction in this cortisol hormone, and the growth and all the important parameters will be unaffected. Right? Now I am going to discuss what is the different physiological response to the heat stress. Upon prolonged exposure to the heat stress, goat elicits specific physiological mechanism that confer them the potential to tolerate heat stress. Obviously, if the animal is feeling the heat stress, definitely it will start some physiological mechanism to decrease the effect of the heat stress, right? And the physiological variable are often considered among the most reliable goat welfare measures, regardless of the breed. Whatever may be the breed, this, with the help of these physiological variables, we can assess the level of the heat stress. And there is a linear relationship between the temperature humidity index and the variable associated with the physiological mechanism. And however, the degree of the response may vary with the magnitude of the heat stress as well as of the goat breeds or the sheep breeds. Definitely, if the magnitude of the stress is more, so definitely the response will be more pronounced. If the stress is at lower level, the responses may be lower. And it can be easily assessed with the help of the temperature, with the help of an index that is called the temperature humidity index. Because I am going to tell you about this temperature humidity index. As you know that the heat stress is not only caused by the temperature, but the stress can be equally contributed by the humidity also. You have personally have definitely felt about this thing, that if the temperature is high, definitely it is causing stress. But if along with the temperature, if the humidity is also high, we feel more stressed, because one of our physiological mechanism to cope up with the heat stress is sweating. We always sweat in this stressed condition, and we try to dissipate the heat through this sweating. But if the relative humidity in the environment is on the higher side, definitely the evaporative heat loss from the skin through the help of sweating, it is hampered and it is difficult for the sweating, and that definitely as a result there is more stress which is felt by us or felt by the animal also. So we consider both the temperature as well as relative humidity when we consider the effect of heat stress on the animals. And so this temperature humidity index is a very important index to assess the effect of heat stress on the animal. And this THI, it is a single value representation representing the combined effect of air temperature and the humidity associated with the level of thermal stress. There are actually, you can see here on the right side of the screen, several formulas are there available for calculating the temperature humidity index. For the for this temperature humidity index, as we need the relative humidity of the environment, so generally two temperatures are taken, and for that we use a specific type of thermometer, that is the dry bulb wet bulb thermometer we use for assessing the relative humidity. And in that dry bulb wet bulb thermometer, we can get two reading. One is reading for the dry bulb and another one is reading for the wet bulb, which is denoted here by small d small b, and as well as small w and small b. So, and with the different formulas are there, as suggested by different researchers in different time periods, which can be used for this calculation of the temperature humidity index. But most commonly used formula is this, which I have been displayed here. This formula can be used most commonly, where T is then in this formula, T is the ambient or the dry bulb temperature in degrees Celsius, and RH is the relative humidity expressed as a proportion, right? So you can see here I have described how this temperature humidity index is affecting the animals. If the temperature humidity index, the value of the THI is less than 72, it is comfortable for the small ruminants. For the large ruminants also, the values are nearly comparable or nearly same. If the temperature humidity index is between 73 to 78, it will causes mild stress and the animal can require the shelter and the shelter modification can be required. If the temperature humidity index is more than 80, so you should understand this, now the animal is in severe stress and it requires shelter, and the microenvironment modification is immediately required. Otherwise, the animal's physiological process, as you know, and again we are going to describe in details later, that physiological responses will be start in the animal and the production is going to affect severely, right? And other than the temperature humidity index, we can also use the respiration rate also as a practical and reliable measure of the heat load. The animal, as you know, that animal utilize the respiratory evaporative cooling mechanism to expel the excess heat, which culminate with the increase in the respiration rate. So with each and every respiration, as the animal is not only exhaling the air, but with the air, it is also exhaling the heat which is generating in the animal's body. So when there is an increase in heat stress, the respiration rate also increase, because the animal always try to dissipate more heat through the evaporative through the respiratory evaporative cooling mechanism. For example, when compared to a basal respiration rate of 15 to 30 breaths per minute, goat exhibits a respiratory rate of 40 to 60, 60 to 80, 80 to 120, and it can be more than 200 breaths per minute when they are exposed to low, medium, high, and severe heat stress. So you can see here how drastically the respiratory rates are increased when there is increase in the stress level in the animals. And so simply when you are observing the animal, by simply observing the respiratory rate of this animal, you can understand that whether this animal at which stress level is in the animal is. Obviously there may be several other reasons also may be there, but this can also be, respiratory rate can also be primarily used as a measure of the heat load in the animal. Now we are going to discuss about the thermoregulation, means how the animals they maintain their core internal temperature through the physiological process of homeostasis. I already told you the environmental temperature may be high, the environmental temperature may be low, but the animal or whether it the human, they always try to maintain a constant core internal temperature. For example, in case of human also, we have a core internal temperature, and whether there is a change in the environment, our core internal temperature, that is always constant, right? But the effect of the heat surrounding on the animals is mainly achieved by energy exchange, which involves convection, conduction, radiation, and the evaporation. You already know that surrounding when the animal is or the human it is in some environment, the heat are exchanged through these mechanisms. And these are the different mechanisms by which heat are exchanged. You already know that conduction with the direct touching the substance, that is the heat is exchanged through convection, that may be the through gaseous, through the liquids, through radiation from a distance, and through also the evaporation also the heats are can be exchanged. And there are different factors are there like breed, genetics, health state, body condition, and the skin color. They also affect the metabolism, thermal exchange rate, and insulation, and all of which contribute to the animal thermal comfort. And if there is excess heat stress on the animal, they can lead to impaired production, impaired reproduction, and also compromised natural immunity and increased susceptibility to the disease, and in general well-being of the animal is greatly compromised. So that's the importance, that if the animal is in heat stress condition, all the positive parameters, all the productive reproductive parameters, growth, production, everything will be hampered. Animal will be susceptible to the disease, and that can cause eventually a loss in the economy for the farmer or the livestock owner, and eventually hamper the economy of the farmer. So the heat stress, it affects the ruminants through various environmental factors. Like I already told you, the extreme temperature may be there, higher solar radiation can be there. As I already told you, relative humidity, that increased in humidity and can also cause the increased stress in the can aggravate the heat stress condition. There can be wind, there can be rainfall, there can be the lack of nutrition, malnutrition. All these factors together can contribute in the heat stress condition. For example, as I mentioned here, that nutrition, Obviously, if one animal is in malnutrition, malnourished condition, and the animal is suffering some heat stress, definitely in the malnourished animal, the heat stress will affect more. However, compared to the large ruminants, the sheep and goat, they adapt to the different environmental changes, often perform better during the heat stress than other ruminant. For example, if there is one cattle and one buffalo, they will suffer more in the heat stress condition compared to the sheep and goat. They will perform in heat stress condition or in aggravated climatic condition. The sheep and goat, they will perform better compared to the cattle. And the small ruminants, they adapt to the severe weather conditions through their behavioral, through their genetic, through their physiological and morphological mechanisms. They have several mechanisms by which they have adapted for this heat stress condition. Now I am going to discuss how these animals are adapted to this heat stress condition and how this adaptation helps the animals to survive or to perform better in these conditions. So an animal's body undergo a physiological, anatomical, behavioral changes when the temperature rise above the thermoneutral zone, definitely. And it results in reduced feed intake, reduced performance, drop in the activity, a acceleration of the breathing rate and the core temperature, change in the peripheral blood flow, and the sweating, endocrine function, all these things are hampered, right? And due to these physiological responses, animal often developed adaptive features to cope up with the environmental changes to guarantee survival. Because obviously for the animal, first it is their survival. And you already know from the theory of the evolution, like survival of the fittest and all these things, all the animal species, they always try to cope up with the environment, to adapt themselves for the harsh environment and bring adaptive changes in their body, in their physiological responses, in their morphological functions, so that they can cope up with the environment and can survive in whatever the environment is provided for them. For example, what are the different like adaptive features are there? First of all, we are going to discuss about the hair characteristics. Hair characteristics are directly associated with the heat exchange of the environment. As already you know, that hair, that is the outer covering of the body and directly exposed or directly in the contact with the environment. So definitely it is one of the major characteristics. The form of the hair coat is considered a prominent physical thermoregulatory feature of the livestock, especially in the sheep and goat. And the hair structure serves two primary functions. First, the protection from the direct solar radiation, and secondly, promoting heat loss through convection and evaporation. So these two functions are performed by the hairs and they help the animals to survive in the conditions. The efficiency of the performance is entirely dependent on the hair coat's physical structure. So whatever are the different physical structure of the hair. For example, whatever is the coat color, what is the depth of the hair, what is the length of the hair, what is the pigmentation of the hair. So different characteristics of the hair that will affect the eventual performance. For example, if the animal will dark coat are more likely to be affected by heat than those with the light coat. For example, I have given here the image of two goats. One is black and one is white. So definitely you know that darker color, as per the law of the physics, it will absorb more heat and it will affect the animal more compared to the light color. For example, I give you one example, like you know the black Bengal breed of the goat. It is majorly this black Bengal breed, an excellent breed for the meat production, the meat quality. It is famous for the meat quality. It has different variants are there, different colors are there. Majorly three colors are seen in this black Bengal. One is black, one is white, another is gray. So definitely, if in the same breed, if one animal has the black color, definitely its the body temperature will be higher. But along with this, I am also telling that it is not ultimate. It should also not be our goal that if one animal is black in color of the same breed, we are discarding the animal or we are culling the animal. No, the animals, although they are affecting in a much higher level, but still they also have different coping mechanisms and can cope up with the environment. Another example, an increase in the thermal insulation occur with an increase in the coating depth. So if the hair coat, if the depth is more, the insulation will be better. And the air space between the hair fiber if increase, which can be attributed for this thermal insulation. And an animal's long hair is an insulator protecting its body and the surrounding. Next, coming to the endocrine adaptation. Heat stress significantly induces the synthesis of the hormone connected to the metabolic processes. For example, thyroid hormone, which you know secreted from the thyroid gland, somatotropin or the growth hormone, glucocorticoids, and the fluid balance hormone important for the fluid balance like aldosterone and anti-diuretic hormones. All these hormones are affected. For example, when the heat stress occurs, thyroid hormone secretion is reduced. Okay, I will again discuss about this thyroid hormone. When the heat stress persists, the growth hormone secretion rate is also reduced. As I discussed earlier, that's how the heat stress is causing an increase in the cortisol level, and as a result, the cortisol increase in the cortisol level is affecting the growth hormone, and the growth of the animal is hampered. In response of the stress, the animal also release the, as I already told you, adrenal corticoids, primarily the cortisol from the adrenal gland, and which is helping the animal actually to cope up with the stress, but eventually decreasing the performance or the production of the animal. Then coming to the genetic adaptation. From the viewpoint of the genetics, animal can inherit the trait that favor their survival in the specific environmental condition. As I already told you, that survival of the species. And regarding this, the small ruminants, they can quickly adapt to the diverse climate, and they are less sensitive to the higher temperature other than the other ruminants. And therefore, it is essential to consider genotype environment interaction and high productivity when selecting the animals adapted to the thermal stress, and utilize this gene as identifier in the selection process. Now, we are going to discuss about the morphological thermoregulation. Morphological thermoregulation in sheep and goat occur through the physical change that enhance their fitness in their operational environment. The central morphological adaptation of the sheep and goat to the different thermal conditions include: what are the different morphological thermoregulation? Their body shape and size, their skin and coat color, coat texture, and the fat accumulation. Coming to the body shape and size, the size and the shape of the animal's body are the dominant morphological characteristics influencing their thermoregulatory means during the scorching weather. Biologically, the larger animals are expected to have a reduced metabolic rate and gain heat more slowly than a smaller animal. And why it happens mostly? Because in case of larger animal, if you compare with a smaller animal, it has a proportionally less body surface area, and our metabolism is generally proportional to the surface area. So in larger animal, they have a proportionally less surface area, so they have a reduced metabolic rate and they gain heat more slowly. And for example, another example is the taller animals. They are expected to release more heat compared to the short and squat bodied animals. For example, the Sudanese Saleh and the Egyptian Jarabic goats, they have the long legs and ear as a thermoregulatory morphological adaptive features for evaporative heat loss. Now, another important is the fat-tailed breed, fat-tailed breeds. You know that 1/4 of the global sheep population are fat-tailed breeds and can accumulate and mobilize body fat from the internal fat depots. And this fat also help in the thermoregulatory morphological feature based on the different environmental conditions. Some other morphological adaptation, the morphology of the external coat of the sheep, they change significantly during the domestication. If we look into the history, that we can find that the primitive sheep breeds, which were where the domestication started, they still possess a double coat of thick external hair and a thinner internal hair. But in the modern wool sheep, after domestication and more selections, now they have a single coat containing both primary and the secondary follicles. And the skin thickness also decrease from the dorsal side to the ventral side on the trunk, and from the proximal to the distally on the in case of limbs. And among the sheep, the pinna, axillary, inguinal, and the perineal regions, they have the thinnest skin, which is the average thickness of nearly 2.6 millimeter in case of adults. And hence these areas with thinner skin and short hair, they act as the thermal window for the heat dissipation, because obviously the animal has to dissipate the heat to the environment. Another example we are going to discuss, that is the heat loss. How the animals lost the heat? Generally the panting, or I told you the respiratory heat loss. Panting account for the 65% of the total heat loss in unshorn sheep, but 59% in case of shorn sheep. When the shearing is done, this heat loss through the panting is decreased, and the thermoregulatory mechanism of the wool sheep changed immediately following the shearing from the evaporative cooling to the heat radiation through the skin. Because when the shearing is done, then there is obviously the animal can radiate the heat directly from the skin, and the mechanism of heat loss is also shifted. And now the heat stress can more readily caused by sheep with the dark pigmentation, those with the light pigmentation. Obviously, you know that like coat color also, if there is pigmentation is also there, so that will be more affected. Those breeds or those individuals will be more affected by the heat stress. And sensible heat is generated whenever the surface does not reflect or transmit the radiation. And a darker coat absorbs solar radiation more efficiently, providing more heat and emitting more energy. And the animals adapted to the hot climates have been observed to change their hair coat colors also and alter their solar absorption. And therefore, selecting the animals with the light color is essential for the welfare and the production efficiency in case of sheep. Now discussing the different behavioral and the physiological mechanism of the thermoregulation. What are the different behavioral adaptation? The small ruminants instinctively adjust their behavior to maintain the body temperature. What are the different behavioral changes? First of all, they reduce the feed and water intake and control their hair growth under the stress. Then they are active mainly the cooler part of the day and often become the nocturnal to minimize their heat exposure. Under the high temperature, feed intake drops to limit the internal heat production. And in the heat stress condition, the goat adapt better than compared to the other ruminants. And the heat stressed goat, they consume less, gain less weight, and grow slower. Among this point, I will want to highlight this thing. First one is that when there is the heat stress in the animal, means animal already suffering from the heat, the environmental temperature is higher, affecting the core temperature and internal temperature of the animal reduce feed intake. Why? Because when the animal takes some feed, there will be some heat generation by the digestion. So already the animal is in heat stress, and again heat is generated through the digestion. So animal will be in more digestion. Probably you have also experienced that after consuming the feed, there is all you also suffer a slight increase in the internal body temperature. So as an to cope up as a cope up mechanism, the animal decrease the feed intake whenever it is in heat stress. Coming to the physiological adaptation, failure of the physiological mechanism under the heat stress lead to the body temperature fluctuation and health risks. The body temperature reflects the net effect of the internal heat gain and loss, and the rectal temperature is a reliable measure of the core body temperature. You already know that rectal temperature, how we take that. The key physiological response involve the elevated core temperature, increase the respiration rate and the heart rate, altered endocrine function, and the sweating. And a rise in the goat core temperature from 38 to 39 suggests that heat exposure over plus 6 hours. So somehow, for example, an animal is presented to you which was under heat stress condition, and for example, in case of goat, it has an 1 degree increase in the core temperature that can caused by a 6 hours of exposure to the heat stress. And the rectal temperature, if it goes above 44, that indicates a severe heat stress, and the animal may also die in this condition if it is not treated properly. And walking stress, for example, walking for some kilometer, they can also raise the animal temperature, which is also important, which we also always should consider during the transportation of the animal. And once above the thermal comfort, evaporative cooling is activated, reducing the sensible heat loss. Now the animals, it has developed several genetic mechanisms of thermoregulation in small ruminant. For example, the adaptive traits open so, but these adaptive traits, they show low heritability, allowing for greater environmental adaptability with the population. What are the, I am going to name some important genes or proteins. For example, the genes associated with the adaptability to temperature change include the HSP70, which is a set of heat shock protein gene that defend the animal from the overheating. There is ENOX2 gene, which has also been found in the goats susceptible to the heat stress. Other polymorphic genes are also there, for example, MCIR, ASIP, TYRP1. They are also been observed in different sheep species and related to the wool color. As I already told you, if there is a change in the wool color, the adaptation in the animals will be different with the different wool colors. So these genes are responsible for different wool colors and also control the rate of heat absorption in those animals. Another important is the mitochondrial DNA. Thermoregulation in the sheep and goat is genetically controlled and involved by several complex genes. And among these, the mitochondria also play. You know that it is you already have about the idea that it's a powerhouse. It is important for the energy production and maintaining the body temperature. And but along with the maintaining the supplying the generating the energy, the mitochondrial DNA in the ruminant, which is a circular double-stranded DNA and shows very little recombination, and this unique feature of this mitochondrial DNA help the animal to adapt the different temperature condition and support thermal regulation. The gene which are present within the mitochondria, they also have a prominent role in the thermoregulation. And in addition to the mitochondrial genes, there are many other nuclear genes and DNA marker are also present across the genome, which are help in the thermal adaptation. Now coming to the endocrine and the metabolic thermoregulatory adaptation. As a result of the stress, the immune system does not respond directly, but instead respond via the neuroendocrine system, as you already know about this. And so transient thermal tolerance is conferred by the heat shock protein, I already told you, which is partly due to the expression of the heat shock protein. And among the different heat shock protein, HSP70 is the most dominant HSP, protecting the cells against the heat-induced damage. And the tissue subjected to the thermal stress rapidly synthesize this heat shock protein so that it can protect the cells or the tissue from these heat stressed conditions. And HSP, how it helps? It helps in the folding and the refolding of the damaged protein in the living tissue and maintain their structural integrity, preventing their aggregation and preventing their aggregation. Preventing their aggregation. A gene also known as HSP90 is also essential for eukaryotes to be viable and to survive. And HSP60 is also a crucial candidate for protecting the native macromolecular structure and function. And when the intracellular concentration of HSP60 is decreased in high temperature, the mortality of the mammalian cell can increase as a consequence. So how this HSP70, HSP90, 60, they have the different roles and important in different ways in the heat stress condition. And along with these proteins, the hormones, as I told you, that cortisol concentration in the blood, it also determines the endocrine adaptation in case of sheep and goat to the different thermal environment. For example, I am giving here example of two breeds and a very important information. You can see here that the Salim black breed is there and Usmanabadi breed is there, right? And the Salim black breed, they have a reduced plasma cortisol condition. In the when these animals when exposed to the heat stress condition, both the animals were exposed to the heat stress condition, but the Salim black breed, it has a reduced plasma cortisol level, and it indicates their superiority in the adaptability to stressful condition compared to the Usmanabadi goat, which has a relatively higher concentration of plasma cortisol in their blood during the summer. So both the breeds exposed to heat stress, one animal has having the higher cortisol level. So having higher cortisol level means it is in higher level of stress and its growth and other parameters are affecting higher. But is another animal has a lower level of cortisol. So that means it is coping up with the environment in a better way. Another important hormone is the thyroid hormones, T3, T4, triiodothyronine and the tetraiodothyronine, which are secreted from the thyroid gland of the body. They are also, the concentration of this T3, T4 also determine the variation in the breed of the sheep and goat with the response to the different conditions. You know, these thyroid hormones particularly, they are very much important for the maintaining the basal metabolism, also for the heat production and several other biomolecular mechanisms, metabolism of the body. For example, in case of Chokla breed, Chokla crossbreed sheep, they exhibit a higher plasma T3 level during the summer, and it indicates that their thyroid glands are not functioning well and their thermoregulations are poor in the heat-stressed environment. So already the animal is in heat-stressed condition, and the thyroid hormones, they helps in increase in the body temperature. But in heat-stressed condition, an animal, it is again producing more thyroid level, so more thyroid hormone. That means the animal is increasing its own metabolic heat. So how the animal will able to cope up with the environment? So first it is being affected by the heat stress. Again, its internal temperature is also increasing, and so it denotes that the thermoregulation is poor in this animal. So, and sheep breeds with a lower plasma thyroid hormone concentration in heat stress condition, they exhibit more adaptation to the heat stress as a result of the decrease in the thermogenesis. And in metabolism, you know, it is a crucial determinant of the thermoregulation which determine the net temperature in the animals. Sheep and goat with relatively small size have reduced metabolic requirement and reduced heat production, and which help them to survive in the heat stress environment. And in addition, the whatever feed we are giving to the animals, whatever volatile fatty acids are produced in the rumen of the animals, they are also essential determinants of the heat production in case of ruminant. In different for volatile fatty acids, that there may be different heat production, and the animals, the condition of the animals can be different. And so the volatile fatty acid, they determine the amount of the heat gained or lost, and which determines the net temperature of the animal. Now coming to the welfare conditions, that what should be the different steps that we should take to for the welfare of the animals, so that they can easily cope up with the environment and the level of the stress can be lower in these animals. So there are several points, like for example the housing and the environment, breeding and genetics, and along with the heat stress, another important thing is the handling and the transport particularly, and during the transport, how we are handling after transport in the preloading conditions, the break journey, and different other points. We are coming one by one. First of all, the housing and that environment, we look that obviously you know the importance of a shed, and the shed they provide with the sufficient spacing and ventilation should be there for the animals to provide the ultimate comfort for the animals. Because if we decrease the heat stress on the animal will perform better, and that is as simple. And the goat, for the goat, they have a peculiar characteristics that they train to rest against a wall, right, rather than lying in the center of a pen. So which could be an anti-predator strategy maybe for the goats. And so for them, there should be provision of the wall should be also be there. So that should be kept in mind. In addition to the sufficient floor space, the type of floor is also essential, as the goat prefer solid and dry surface. And so we must ensure a clean, dry, and adequately ventilated housing environment for the goat, keeping them comfortable and protecting them from the disease. Another is the breeding and the genetics. And the researchers, that Elena and the co-worker, they studied the resilience of the capacity of these three indigenous goat breeds, Osmanabadi, Malabari, and Salim Black, in the heat-stressed exposed condition. And on comparing the several physiological, behavioral, and the molecular level assessment, it was concluded that the Salim Black breed was better adapted to handle the heat stress than Osmanabadi and the Malabari goat. So why this is happening? Because of their genes present in those particular breed and the particular breed characteristics. And this breed performed well despite their test location was different from the native zone. And so there should be emphasis should be given to develop agroecological zone specific breeds should be developed, ensuring the sustainability in the climate change scenario. So for different agroclimatic zone, there should be different breeds. Coming to the next, the handling and the transport. So transport, though it is not directly related to the heat stress, but here I am decreasing at in most of the conditions, the animals in the during at the time of the transport, they suffer both from the transport stress and as well as heat stress. So we should consider all the things together. So the prolonged livestock species transport, it can cause the complex pathophysiological changes, such as there can be increased hemoglobin, increased in the packed cell volume, increased in the neutrophil, eosinophil, there may be decrease in the electrolyte, and increase in the cortisol concentration, as you already know, brought by handling, loading, transportation, vehicle movement, and adverse effect of the weather variables. What can affect these physiological parameters? So how the animal should be handled after the transport? So during the transportation of the animal, handling is too critical to prevent the exciting the animals, as it requires up to 30 minutes for the animal to calm down after rough handling. And you know, if the animals is in excited condition, it's the stress level will increase in the animal, and will affect its physiology. The animal handlers should move very slowly and deliberately without agitating the animals, and particularly as the goats and sheep also, they are the social animals. They should be handled in groups instead of the individual. What should be the different preloading precautions? The goats are highly socialized, as I already told you, and when they are unable to maintain the visual contact with other animals for a long time, it can cause emotional stress also. In addition, the horned and hornless animal, they should not be mixed in the same vehicle, and they should be kept in separately. And the goat and sheep should also not be mixed with other species. At a time, only one species should be transported. And further, pregnant, diseased, injured, or the emaciated animals which are unfit for the transport are, as they cannot withstand the transportation stress. So these animals should not be transported. And the animals should always have free access to fresh water and feed both before and after the transportation. And in between the transportation, it is also important for the break in the journey. If the journey is long, definitely there should be the break in the journey for the comfort of the animals. And I will just give some example. For example, if the goat is transported 12 hours over a distance of about 350 kilometers, they exhibit significant decreased live body weight compared to the preload weight. Definitely, due to the transport, there is a loss of body weight. And the transportation of boat up to 8 hours during the hot, humid, and the winter seasons can cause stress and result in the decreased body weight. And the goat are highly susceptible to the respiratory infection after a long journey under the adverse environmental conditions. And so the European Union regulation relating to the welfare of the animal transport, they permit a maximum journey time of 19 hours, which include 1 hour break for the feed, water, and rest for every 8 to 9 hours. For every 8 to 9 hours, there should be a break. And the goats should be uploaded after 24 hours for the feed, water, and rest and exercise. If the journey takes longer than the 30 hours, then they should be uploaded also for this transport. And we should always try that we can the as maximum as possible, we should try to transport in the cool hour of the day. The high environmental temperature will increase the risk of the heat stress and obviously the mortality during the transportation. So it is preferable to transport the animals during the cooler period of the day. That can be morning, that can be the evening, or even in the night, particularly in the tropical region with higher environmental temperature. So these are the important points we should keep in mind during transportation of the animal, because as I told you, the transportation stress that results in the decrease in the body weight, that can make the animal susceptible to the disease, susceptible to the infection. The production performance can be lower. So for this and this transportation stress along with the heat stress and also the social stress of the animal, so many stress act together in the animal in the transportation and can hamper the production of the animal. So these points should be kept in mind during the transportation. So, and we should also ensure clean drinking water periodically during the transport. The transportation of the ruminant for the long extended period without feed and water result in the loss of body weight, and the animal lose the body weight due to the high energy requirement for the thermoregulation as well as the respiratory and cutaneous water loss, particularly in the summer situation. And the lactating and the young goat, they must be provided water every 8 hours, while the adult goat may need to be watered every 12 hours during the transport. We should also supplement electrolyte during the transportation. So handling, loading, and the transportation, as you know, that it can also affect the electrolyte balance of the animals and can result in the respiratory alkalosis, dehydration, and the muscle damage. So the supplementation of the vitamin C, which is a that very important antioxidant of the animal, antioxidant for the animal, and also the electrolyte can be supplemented to the animals for reducing the transportation stress in case of sheep and goat. So now I would like to conclude my presentation with that the external coat and the skin morphology, as I have already discussed, they play a very vital role in the thermal regulation, as many of the animals, they have developed certain adaptation characteristics so that they can cope up with the external temperature, and as a result, their skin coat and their morphology, they has been changed during the course of the time. And we should also keep in mind these features when we are going to select the animals and when we are going to treat an animal in the heat stress condition. And the behavioral response such as nocturnal activity, reduced feed intake, and strategic resting patterns also help to minimize the heat stress. And we should always keep in the mind how these things can help in the reducing the heat stress. The physiological adaptation also, they enable the short-term heat stress management, but the genetic adaptation, they are central for the long-term thermotolerance in case of small ruminants. And along with this, endocrine response such as reduced cortisol and the thyroid hormone level are indicative of better heat adaptation. I already discussed about how the cortisol level, which is also called the stress hormone, how and particularly the thyroid hormone, which helps in the increase in the metabolic heat, are important for selecting the animals and for judging the animals, which animal is better tolerant in the heat stress condition. So this level of the hormones are also important, and we should always keep in mind the animal welfare practices, including proper housing, breed selection, and the stress minimizing transport methods, which are essential to ensure the resilience, productivity, and comfort in the hot or climatic conditions. So not only it will ensure and welfare for the animals, which is a very much important for the animals, but will also help the animals to reduce the effect of the heat stress on the animals, and will ensure a better productivity from the animals in terms of maybe meat production, maybe in terms of milk production, maybe in terms of growth, and will eventually help to boost the economy of the livestock owners.